So, last week, we talked about a few things along the lines of apologetics. Do either of you guys that were here remember what apologetics is?
Proof of believing something.
Okay, I want to stop you because you're very, very close. Caleb, what is it that she said that was wrong? Take that. Come on. What is it she said? The only part of her statement that I don't like to say, I don't think that it's good. You know what that was? That she said that, say it again, see if he catches it.
Was it proof?
She even knows what she said.
The evidence.
Yeah, evidence. Okay? We said last week, and I'm going to pound this and pound this and pound this. We do not have proof. Okay? That's important. What we have is evidence. The same thing that science has. We have evidence. They have evidence. And we look at the evidence differently. That's important. Always remember that, because you don't want to get caught by a scientist or somebody that is an agnostic or an atheist, and you say that we can prove something when they know we can't. All right? They think they can too, just like we think we can. But neither side can actually prove this. Nobody was there. All right? But, yeah, so we said that apologetics was a reasoned argument. It was the Greek word for defense is a lawyer in a trial. And we said that the foundations of apologetic must be based on evidence. So, Hunter, one of the things that we emphasized was not just the evidence, but that apologetics was not apologizing for something. It's standing up for what we believe and figuring out why we believe it. So there's a difference between the word apology and the word apologetic. So in other words, is there actual evidence for an intelligence beyond ourselves, like what we think is a God? There is a lot of people that do not believe that that is possible, but that's what we're looking at in this class. Does a God or does an intelligence exist? And we are looking at whether or not he is the creator of all things. How do we defend this position is what we go into. And last week we looked at the camera. We said what a camera was. We said what photography was. And we looked at the parts of a camera, if you remember, that they were very, very simple. There was an aperture, there was a dark box, there was a shutter, there was all these things. And I laid out for you those pieces of a shoebox that I had taken pictures with here on the table as separate pieces that would have to be constructed by something or someone to put them together in order for it to actually take the kind of picture that we had talked about. And we talked about these kinds of cameras. I actually showed you these kinds. And we said that the modern camera is very, very complicated, way more complicated than the shoebox camera, and that there are certain things that happen within that camera, whether it's a shoebox or whether it's a modern digital camera, that act just like the eye. So the point last week that we were trying to talk about was the eye is very sophisticated. It's a sophisticated camera. Why do many people say that it does not have a designer, whereas they have to say that the shoebox or the digital camera has to have a designer? And we went all the way back to William Paley, who was the guy that made the watch analogy, and he said, a watch is complex, tells time, it has a designer. The eye is also very complex, it has a purpose, and therefore it would seem as if it should have a designer. And when we got to this quote by Charles Darwin, it said to suppose that the eye with all of its, and I interpreted those two words in this statement, with all of its unique mechanisms for adjusting for focus and all the other things that have to be done in a camera or in an eye, he says, I freely confess that it's absurd to the highest degree. So even Darwin had his doubts as to whether or not whether the eye could have evolved. So what I want to deal with today, can you see or think of any potential problems with the line of reasoning that we did last week? So what I mean by that is we're saying that because a camera or a shoebox camera has to be designed by a person, by a mind, therefore we think that an eye would also have to be designed by a person or a mind. Can you see a way that the atheist would say, no, that's not true because they're different? It's like comparing apples and oranges. Can you think of something they might object to and say, no, what you're saying can't be true or isn't true? Any ideas? Caleb? It's a rather simple one. It took me a long time to come up with this. Any ideas? All right, let's go into them then. So what they say is that we are told that the eye could evolve, but the camera cannot because of a serious distinction. And that distinction is that the eye is made out of organic material and the camera is not. What is organic material? Now remember, one of you guys didn't get a good biology teacher, so I think you know the difference, though. Don't you know the difference between organic and inorganic material? Hunter, do you? Are you yourself, you as a person, are you organic material or inorganic material? You are organic. Why is he organic material instead of inorganic? Maybe, but that's not the main, it's good try, but that's not the main point. Organic material is living. Inorganic material is not. So, you're organic material. Name something else that's organic material, Caleb. There's lots of things.
All of the dogs, cats.
Yeah, trees, flowers, birds. Yeah, name something that's inorganic.
That would.
That would, but that would used to be organic. So it's kind of on, it depends on how you look at it. Name something that is inorganic and has been since its inception, though.
Your pen.
Huh?
Your pen.
Yes, my pen. What about a rock? Sand, dirt, iron, all right? Those are all inorganic materials. Now, so since a camera is made out of inorganic material and an eye is made out of organic material, what they say is that the eye could actually evolve because it's not inorganic. I think that's a problem. I think they still have a serious problem, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Matter or inorganic material is simply lifeless stuff, never having life. In fact, when I asked this question in this church about a decade ago, I had somebody that actually asked that very question. Okay, we talked about what we talked about last week when we got to this part of it. They said, yeah, but the eye is organic material. No, this person believed in God, but they still didn't see what you're going to see right now. I think there's a fatal flaw in this line of reasoning, and it's because of where they come from and where they go back when they look at the evolutionary process. To illustrate, I'm going to go back to my college years, and I'm going to talk about a time when I was sitting in a philosophy class taught by an atheist. Short story. The lecture that particular day was on something called determinism. Now, determinism is a rather interesting philosophy. It's the doctrine of all events, including human action, are ultimately determined by causes external to the will. Some philosophers have taken determinism to imply that individual humans have no free will and cannot be held morally responsible for their actions. The implication becomes that things that happened before you predetermine what you do. So, you're in church, right? What's a reason why you were in church? Physically speaking, I'm talking about what happened earlier that you're here today.
I got drove.
You got drove here, all right? And before that, your grandpa got up, right? And said, get out of bed, made you breakfast. And before that, you went to sleep the night before. And before that, your grandpa knew the next day he was going to do all those things to get you here. You see how determinism is like a line of events, that this happened because of this cause, and this happened because of this cause, and this happened because of this cause? That's determinism. What you do now is determined by something that happened in your past. Okay? Some philosophers have taken determinism to imply individual human beings have no free will. In other words, because of the things that have happened in your past, you had no choice but to be here today. I don't believe that, but that's what some determinists believe. That you have to do what you're doing because there's something that happened to you earlier that forced you to be in the situation that you're in now. Well, when I heard this in the philosophy class, the very first thing I did, since I am a inquisitive kind of smart aleck, I raised my hand and I asked an uncomfortable question. Here's the question, basically. If you say that something is determined by previous events, then that chain would continue backwards, reaching as far back into the distant past as possible. It seems to me that this chain of progression, this chain of events, must someplace along the line have had a starting point somewhere in the past, a first cause, if you will. Any idea what the philosophy instructor said after that? He actually said two things to me. The first thing he responded was, some would say that some kind of first cause initiated this whole chain of events, and that some people might say that this first cause was some kind of a God. He said, "What?" This was his explanation, what he thought, or at least what a determinist would think. A true determinist would tell you that there was no first cause, and therefore the deterministic chain of events goes back in infinity backwards, and in other words, in both directions for infinity. So look at these. Which one of these kinds of ideas would you agree with? Do you think that there was an initial first cause, or do you think that there was no first cause and that things go back, the chain of cause and effect goes back, and never ends all the way back to no beginning? You understand the question? Do you have any idea of which you think this might be true?
Let's start.
Yeah, would make more sense to be a starting point, right? And I would agree with that. Determinism in this sense is often understood as incompatible with free will, like we just said, or the power of people to be able to have any kind of first cause. As Darwin said about the evolution of the eye, that his theory seemed absurd to the highest degree. I kind of think that's true of this. this theory at the bottom here with no first cause seems kind of crazy, but that's what a lot of people actually are forced to believe if they don't believe in the first initial first cause. How could this possibly apply to our discussion today? And that's what we're going to talk about next. The great question when it comes to this question, when I was in high school, of what existed in the past, the answer was either mind existed or matter existed. And that question is still in debate today. In fact, we had a kid in our high school that used to walk around and say, ether always was. Now he said that because ether was an inert matter, and he didn't want to believe in God. So he knew he had to believe that something always existed. So he picked ether, he picked the gas. All right? The evolutionists think that matter of some kind had to always exist. Why? Why does an evolutionist, an atheistic evolutionist, have to think that matter always existed? In other words, we're taking that bottom chain, going back farther and farther and farther and farther, and back there, farther and farther. Matter always had to exist. Why? It's really kind of fundamental. Because you can't say that matter popped out of nothing if you don't want to believe in God. There is a comedian that puts it this way. Listen carefully, please. All right? Some people think God created the universe. Other people think that nothing created the universe. Which one of these two is the funniest guess? God created the universe or nothing created the universe? The nothing people, these are the atheists. These are the people that don't want to believe in God. The atheist people, or in other words, the nothing people, make fun of the God people. They say that God does not exist. Well, maybe, but you know what definitely doesn't exist? Nothing. That is definitely the definition of nothing. It doesn't exist. So, whether you think it is God, something you cannot see, touch, taste, and scientifically prove, right? We're going to talk more about that later. Or if you think that what existed from the beginning is nothing, something that you cannot see, taste, touch, or scientifically prove, I hope that we all can agree that if your nothing spontaneously erupted into everything, then there is more magical, that is more magical than if an intelligence like God created everything. Think about that for a minute. All right? You're going to be bombarded with people that say, yeah, but how do you know God could exist? Well, you have to think that nothing existed or that matter always existed. You either have to be a determinist or you have to think that something popped out of absolutely nothing if you're going to be an atheist. All right? Science is actually wrestling with those problems, and they don't want to. I've heard them talk about it. They get real skittish when they have to. If you say that a God created everything from nothing in a short period of time, it is often called a fairy tale by people. But if you conclude that everything came from nothing over billions and billions of years, then it's called science. You see the difference? I can see a smirk on your face a little bit. Starting to see it? Okay. Let's begin with humans today and see what that might look like if we work our way backwards. Anybody ever seen this chart before? Yes? Some science book or some material that you've seen on TV or someplace you've seen this. Now, we're going to talk in detail, not too much, I don't know if it's next week or the week after, but we're going to talk about this chart. And there are some things that are definitely wrong about this chart. All right? But that's not what we're going to discuss today. We're going to talk about one specific thing. There is a problem with this chart. Is there anything that pops out at you as being problematic? So what we've got is modern man going back to some other, what they would call predecessors of Homo sapien, and then back to several different kinds of monkey creatures. All right? The problem I see is the chart, where the chart stops. Why do I see that as a problem? Going backwards where it stops. Why do I see that as a problem? What is it not telling us?
What it came from?
What came from?
The
The first monkey. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, you're getting it. So really, this is a more accurate chart, wouldn't you think? But that's not shown very often in your science books. All right, and we're going to talk about why that's not often talked about. Now, this particular one is the original drawing. It's not the original, but it's a copy of the original drawing of a guy named Ernst Haeckel. He was a German guy that promoted Darwin's ideas. We're going to talk about him quite a bit in some future classes. But today, we're going to talk about this chart only in a little bit different way. What happens is, we don't go back simply to a monkey because evolution is, if evolution is truly real, atheistic evolution is truly real, then we didn't simply come from monkeys. Monkeys had to come from somewhere. And he traces it back, all the way back to that upper left-hand corner. What is that? Several different kinds of words you can use for it. Have you ever seen a chart like this? Anywhere? Science class or anything? This is the one that should be shown you. You see in the upper left-hand corner, that little blob, that is like a single-cell organism, or what some people call an amoeba. Okay? It's a very, it's the simplest living organism possible. And that's how the evolutionists today think that life came about, was starting with that single-cell organism. All right? That little blob of what seems like nothing. So why are we usually shown just the first slide, this one back here, where it only goes back to a monkey? Because that's almost believable, because we know some people that act like monkeys, right? Maybe they came from that. But when you look at this, most people don't want to think that they came from a single piece of slime. All right? So you're not shown that very often. So I want to look at this one. For me, this is the kind of chart that should always be shown. If evolutionists were being honest, this is what we would be seeing. We had to have come from something before the monkey. The monkey had to come from something and somewhere. And deterministically speaking, in a physical sense, something had to come before that, and before that, and before that, all the way back to whatever the beginning was, if there was one. So if evolution is true, then what came before man is better explained in a chart like this one. Unless, of course, life always existed. But the evolutionist does not want us to believe that life always existed. Under this scenario, our human ancestors can be traced back to some kind of single-cell organism. But there is something still missing in this chart. This is the crux of today. You're going to pay attention now. What is it that's still missing in this line of cause and effect? in this line of deterministic thought, in this line of something evolved from something else. And it should, like, forcefully come out in front of everybody, but I find that it doesn't. It didn't on me for a very long time. Any ideas? No? Any ideas? What was it that the evolutionists or the determinists say happened first, or that maybe always was? We just talked about that.
The monkeys.
No. Way before that. Before those single cell protocells right there. What always was? See, we can't do that in our own heads because nobody's ever pointed it out to us. Matter. So what came before the single cell? Inert matter. Now we're going to talk about how they think that life jumped. This is in a later class. How they say life jumped from matter to a single cell, but they don't start out with a single cell. There isn't an evolutionist today that thinks. I'm talking of atheistic evolutionists, people that don't believe in God. There isn't a single one of them that will tell you that there was life before life, that life always was. What they tell you was life came from non-life. There is a single cell, but before that single cell came onto the scene, there was only matter. Let that sink in. This is important. A single cell organism has life. It has movement. It has some kind of motion. It may even have some kind of thought or purpose inside of itself. But it is not what came first. Something had to have come before the single cell organism. And even the atheistic evolutionists must concede that before the single cell, there was something else, because the single cell did not come from nothing and it did not always exist. According to their own theory, what we present, what was present before the single cell organism arrived on the scene was inert matter. Now, inert matter, we've just got done talking a little bit about it, as we said that that's the stuff that's lifeless, like a rock, like an ether gas, like sand, things that's never been, things that are non-organic. When you're in college, you're going to study two kinds of chemistry if you go far enough in chemistry. It's going to be organic chemistry and inorganic chemistry. They keep them separate for a reason, okay? So, inert matter refers to something that has no inherent power of action, motion, or resistance of any kind. It refers to non-living material such as sand and dirt and other debris. And its synonyms are motionless, lifeless, and those kinds of things. So, look at here. The start that we should be looking at is not with a monkey, and it is not even with the single cell. It is with the rock. You with me? So, can this inorganic, inert matter, can it think? Just think of a rock. Can it think? Can it feel? Can it breathe? Is it capable of logic? Can it create things like works of music and art? Can it communicate? No, it can't. But you can. Right? So, under this kind of evolutionary structure, We did not come from monkeys per se. We came from a single cell organism. We came from inert matter like sand and dust and rocks. So, this would be our actual ancestor. In other words, that's the true descent of man, according to their theory. I'm just skipping all the middlemen. I can't see that I would ever believe that the intellect that I do have, and some people say it's more and some people say it's a lot less, I can't believe that the intellect that anybody in this room had came from that. But atheistic evolution has to say that's true. Does that make sense? That's important. And I can guarantee that some of your atheistic science teachers have never thought about this before. Or if they have, they don't think about it very long. Where was I going to go next? Oh, the next question that can be asked is, where? Now, when you've got a theory about how something happened and you want it to be taken seriously, you have to cover all your bases, because if somebody finds a flaw in it and say, look, this absolutely positively doesn't work, so your theory is wrong, then you have to either abandon that theory or you have to come up with a way that transverses that gap. Now, I think at this point they've got a gap, because a rock can't think and we can. A rock can't move and we can. A rock can't do logic, a rock can't paint, a rock can't breathe, and we can. How is it? I mean, they didn't, when they figured that out, they didn't abandon the theory. How did they bridge that gap? How did they say we got to be able to think, have logic, and to do all the things that we do in a life form rather than a lifeless form? How did they bridge that gap? How we got from no thought to intelligence? Who wants to guess? Chemistry and electricity. Why do you think, and you guys haven't even done this yet, I was hoping that the older guys that were in the class sometimes would be here right now, because they would run into this in maybe a college class or whatever. Why do you think that they teach psychology classes in college from the point of view of chemistry and electricity? The reason is because they have to. Now, I'm not saying there isn't some truth in it. We can get into that later. But they have to believe that our thought came from somewhere, so that as chemistry and electricity evolved in the world, it kind of, over time, started snapping things in what would become a brain, and eventually we could think.
Or as my psychology professor put it, the electricity evolved over time to create our neurons, which then created our nervous system.
You have heard that
Yes.
before.
I took psychology in high school.
I am very impressed. Did you understand what his flaw was when he said it at the time?
No, at first.
Yeah. Do you think that he fully understood the implications of what he thinks? No, I don't think so either. I don't think very many people do. Okay? I don't believe in evolution because of my belief in a first cause being some kind of intelligence, all right? But if they were going to persuade me, they can almost persuade me that a monkey could turn into a man. They're not going to, but there was a time when I think they might be able to almost persuade me of that. Or that before the monkey there was this, before all the way back to a single cell. But going back to the idea that that we started as inert matter, we started as a rock, and that our intelligence came from only chemistry and electricity, what does that mean? That means we don't have any free will. What that means is that what you think and you want to do, you're predetermined to have to do it because it's only chemistry and electricity that's allowing you to do those things. I do not think that's true. I hope you don't either. I don't know if any of you guys have ever heard of this guy, Friedrich Nietzsche. He was real popular when I was in high school. People started to know about him, and when I was in college, he was important. Friedrich Nietzsche, he lived in like the 1880s, and he was the guy that first said that God is dead. Okay, he was really he was kind of well known for that. But it wasn't until 1966, when I was in high school, that Time magazine came out and asked the question, is God dead? They were playing off from what Nietzsche did 80 years before. And it was a big deal at the time. And I think it was at a point where what you're seeing today with a society that believes yet less and less in God, this magazine, and they're dealing with what Nietzsche said 80 years before, has made a difference up to today. A big difference. And I think, this is all my own personal opinion, that it's no wonder that Nietzsche went insane at the end of his life. Because he couldn't live with his own theory. What's implied, pay close attention to this. What is implied if your thoughts, everybody's thoughts, come from a rock and are only products of electricity and chemistry? What does that say about rules? What does that say about rules? Aren't they arbitrary? Thought up by a rock? Or the chemistry and electricity that come from a rock?
Nathan was the priest, nothing is permitted, everything is justified.
That's right. Say that louder.
Nothing is permitted, everything is justified.
Is it say, yeah, that's another way of saying the same thing, isn't it? Absolutely. What does that say about somebody that is defended in a courtroom, not because they're trying to say they're innocent, but because they say that the circumstances surrounding what I did made it necessary that I do it. And this is defense that's used a lot. So you murdered somebody, not because of self-defense, but you murdered somebody, and it was your chemistry and electricity going back and back and back to that rock that made that something that you had to do. There's a whole lot of things that change. And in the atheistic evolutionary world, there is a different way of thinking about stuff than there is by people that believe there was an initial first cause, and that first cause was the God of the Bible, or some kind of intelligence at least. So here's the conclusion that I'm coming up with. It says this: therefore, under their theory, the eye and everything every living organism that exists today had to have come from inert matter, mindless, non-intelligence, no movement, etc. Just like the parts of that camera. So where they were trying to say the eye can evolve because it comes from organic matter that's living, I say to them, but the eye had to come from somewhere. And initially, if you go back far enough, the eye has to come from inorganic matter. somewhere along the lines, even in the atheistic world, there has to be a beginning of inorganic stuff, and everything came from it. So I think that our analogy from last week, that shoebox camera that we talked about, 30 years I had it there. It never changed, never tried to put itself together, and I don't think it would do it for another 1 million or 2 million. But I think the eye analogy is still true, because maybe the eye is now organic, but sometime in the past, its ancestors were not. Only under the evolutionary model, there were not even any parts to begin with. At least I laid out a camera here that had a shoebox, some black paper, some scissors to cut it if we need, some tape, some photo-sensitive material, something to make that small hole in that shutter with. I gave it a head start. With the eye, that stuff wasn't even made yet. Those pieces had to be formed first. And that is what we're going to start talking about next week. We're going to talk about symbiotic relationships and intelligent design. Okay? That's all I got today.
Just to fill you in on what he was saying earlier. So there's a video, and I'll put all this
One
out.
of the most popular
Video games ever. It's called Assassin's Creed. And there's two warring factions, the Assassin Brotherhood and the Templars, okay? And the Assassins have a creed that says nothing is true, everything is permitted. Well, the Templars, who are painted as the bad guys in that series, they simply ask the question, look, if nothing's true and everything's permitted, then no one is safe. So that's where he got that from. Yeah. And it's true. And they're the bad guys for making that logical leap. If everything's true, no one's safe. Or nothing's true.
And it is a logical leap.
It is. Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what Nietzsche saw, and I think that's what some others
Yeah.
are getting to see.
Was it Nietzsche or Camus that said the only thing that human beings have left to do is why not commit suicide? That's the only question we have left if you go down this.
Why not go around murdering,
Exactly.
raping, and robbing banks to become rich and famous?
Exactly. Take it to the nth degree. Do whatever you want. So, yeah.